Collaborations are rarely as vibrant and energetic as Tokyo Mirage Sessions' Sharp FE, and by creatively combining its disparate elements, Sharp FE will prove to players that there's plenty of value and depth in its experimentation if they're willing to overlook those weaker layers at the periphery of the experience. A colourful blend of Atlus's Shin Megami Tensei series and Nintendo's Fire Emblem characters, Sharp FE is an RPG that in most ways is quite unlike anything else, and in others is a touch too familiar. Set in modern-day Tokyo, Sharp FE follows the exploits of a group of up-and-coming performers, singers, and predictably photogenic teens from their humble beginnings to their ascent into Japanese superstardom. Though at first glance, its fresh coat of paint, its setting, substance, and lack of localization may seem deeply unfamiliar to Western audiences, it's important not to be discouraged by what initially seems like a shallow means to paper over the cracks and weaknesses imported from its different influences, because behind that curtain lies the star of the show. Sharp FE mixes the familiar affinity-based combat of Fire Emblem and the magical weaknesses and resistances of Shin Megami Tensei. To this formula, Sharp FE adds its own unique twist in the form of session skills. Rather than granting the player an extra turn after exploiting a weakness, it instead opens a chain of subsequent passive moves by other playable characters to create potentially devastating combinations. However, enemies can also initiate such sessions, and players must always use their initiative to create momentum and finish foes quickly or strategically to disrupt these sessions. Though there are some other interesting strategic quirks that arise, such as the necessity to finish off all foes at once, paying attention to precise turn order, and exploring new enemy resistances through overflowing sessions, there is nothing particularly innovative about Sharp FE on paper. Instead, it's in its delivery that it truly shines. Combat is exquisitely dynamic, with characters popping in and out, moving comically or balletically, and springing back and forth between enemies. Special performances, grand and devastating moves with special effects, are nothing short of stimulating, and in concert with clever details like a rapacious crowd, ludicrous, colourful attire, and the hilarity of characters taking the time to draw their signatures, this culminates in quite a glorious spectacle. As if this wasn't enough, random events known as ad-lib performances add even more flair when they arise, and duo arts or character-specific collaborations can extend sessions even further when they spring up in the course of action. There's a sublime amount of personality in its combat too, in its poses, expressions, and dialogue. Meanwhile, upgradable session skills contribute a welcome variety to the combat with fresh new animations for these newer session skills later during the game. Furthermore, Sharp FE fully embraces the humour and inherent absurdity of these performances, abandoning all subtlety to great effect, leaving players bemused, confused, or downright dumbstruck as they watch on while two teenage girls with matching knee-length cat boots in lurid pink and purple attire tackle a particularly nasty-looking ogre. Not only are these sessions visually exciting, but these chains can offer a deeply satisfying release of tension during slower, more careful affairs or grave encounters. Simply put, the essence of Tokyo Mirage Sessions is so sublimely involved and active, which is extremely rare in the turn-based genre. Beyond the raw stimulation, there's something wonderfully experimental in discovering what new athletic moves and poses each new session skill or special performance will provide for your delectation. This perfectly complements the traditional RPG hook of building and refining character skill sets. Thus, longer sessions provide both extra currency and special items from particular enemies that are necessary to create new weapons, so players experimenting with longer sessions and indulging in the spectacle at the same time is crucial. Each new weapon, known as a carnage, from which new moves are inherited through use, can be created by combining such items and its star-based currency that are rewards for longer and more dynamic sessions. there's a phenomenal amount of weapons, granting players innumerable options to customize movesets to their liking. There's also potential for bifurcate character refinement in class change, and even certain passive radiant skills to upgrade. In short, if caught by such experimentation, infinitely large amounts of customization await players to sate their inquisitiveness. Thus, when spectacle is combined with these traditional elements, what's formed is a potent and almost unrivaled concoction of vivid, intense, and addictive RPG action. On top of all this, Sharp FE makes a conscious effort to ameliorate the problems of its constituents. Despite a largely banal initial dungeon, Sharp FE endeavours to make this particular feature more interesting, whether through puzzles or intriguing visuals, though only to limited success. On one hand, savage enemy encounters, high-level random skirmishes, ensure there's always a new and unforeseen challenge, no matter how much players have prepared. On the same note, grinding itself is generally not as onerous as its RPG contemporaries, thanks to the sheer novelty and dynamism of the battle sequences. This doesn't quite eliminate the toil, but does a relatively decent job of absorbing some of it when it's necessary, though this is not often. That said, like many JRPGs, dungeon crawling is never quite fully satisfactory. Despite their initial interest, many dungeons do feel, due to their contained nature, as if they overstay their welcome. This is not due to something such as too high an encounter rate, but rather there's an inherent lack of momentum or progress throughout. This may be attributed to the ground that must be retread to complete the tasks and puzzles therein, but on a more simple note, dungeons are generally broader, with fewer levels, and in this way, without a descent or climb towards inevitable confrontation, tropes which are parts of classic JRPGs, they can feel slightly anticlimactic. Indeed, this is compounded by the lack of variety to combat arenas, which remain the same or similar throughout the game, so that boss encounters can sometimes seem unremarkable. These details detract from Sharp FE's core role-playing strengths, but never to too great an extent, and only begin to wear towards the end of the 45-hour experience or after extended periods of play. Characterization is always a crucial part of RPGs, and Sharp FE takes its roots in Shin Megami Tensei seriously, so players' time outside its dungeons interacting with its characters is still just as important. Such narrative development is predictably linked to your gameplay, but is more closely tied in than before. Opening new side stories requires raising characters' stage ranks by participating in sessions, and in this way, Sharp FE reminds us of its true focus, folding its core gameplay systems a step further into its narrative side. Raising links through these side stories will provide value to players through its vignettes of the lives of artists and performers, as well as rewarding them with new ad-lib performances, radiant unities, or duo arts, to enliven further an already effervescent combat structure. When it comes to these side stories themselves, the most immediate detail players will notice in this regard is the presentation of its characters. Rather than localizing dialogue for Western audiences, Sharp FE retains its original Japanese voice performances. And despite the avenue this gives for humorous text localization, this is perhaps a key factor that launches its compatriots to great heights. Though this issue can be overcome in certain games, Sharp FE fails to be quite personal enough to surmount it. Moreover, a third-person view and voiced protagonist provides a sufficiently remote perspective to ensure that an immediate connection to these characters is made quite difficult, and ultimately a memorable and long-lasting connection too. Indeed, Sharp FE perhaps tacitly admits this, choosing to deliver its most important moments of interaction, whether for a major plot point or as the conclusion to a significant character arc, from a first-person perspective. Though it's easy to say that these conclusive moments would undoubtedly be its most pivotal scenes, it's nonetheless hard to divorce the substance from the perspective. Furthermore, though the character design itself is unique and colourful, the portrayal of characters using these stylized models is another issue in this regard, as it feels like an unsatisfactory halfway house between more photorealistic depiction and sprite-based depiction. and simply lacks the finer, more intimate human detail of either. Sharp FE also contains occasional binary conversation choices, and though it's always amusing to be funny, raunchy, or downright rude, these hold little of value beyond the occasional source of levity and are too shallow to be compelling. That said, there's still some understandable substance to be played with here, in the tribulations of the ascetic perfectionist, the insular and remote pop sensation trying to mask her vulnerability, or the brash but idealistic child actress rendered outcast by her race. It seems therefore that there are certain key ingredients that make an unforgettable character-driven experience in video games: perspective, detail, of which voice performances are crucial, and substance. And unfortunately, Sharp FE only presents the very latter. These factors, or lack thereof, make Tokyo Mirage Sessions a slightly more difficult pill to swallow in the beginning, and ultimately prevent it from reaching the highest of peaks in its character design and story. The actual content of side missions is, just about, more of a joy than a task. During the 3-step social link process, some may offer some sort of interesting boss encounter as the climax, while others can involve either simple navigation from place to place, or going and defeating a certain number of specific enemies. Though these give avenue for character development or allow players to indulge in combat once more, they do seem a little uninspired at best, and at worst can have you cluelessly wandering dungeons searching for items scattered throughout. Finally, Sharp FE's main storyline, due perhaps to its heritage alone, is never intended to be a drawing point for some deeply intricate plot of revenge, betrayal and redemption, but should be seen instead as a simple tale of good and evil that gives venue for some of its more valuable ancillary character development and to spotlight some of Sharp FE's most remarkable spectacle. This comes in the form of beautifully animated scenes of extravagant concerts and dazzling performances, all of which, due to the sheer scope and detail of their animation, will stand out as high points for all players. From a technical perspective, though there are a few frame drops during intense boss battles, for the most part Sharp FE runs well, and even those rare frame drops won't affect gameplay in any meaningful way. Sharp FE also has a few interesting design decisions that are worth mentioning for how they complement the experience. First and foremost is Sharp FE's use of the Wii U gamepad, which it utilizes as a messaging system. Here, players are contacted by characters to initiate side stories, to be given instructions for tasks, and most importantly, to circumvent unnecessary scenes of exposition. This is a novel and realistic tool to hold in your hands, and is also useful as a means of keeping track of side stories and new unities, while presenting an avenue for smaller character quirks to shine through in text. Another note worth mentioning is the absence of a day-night and even weather cycle during Sharp FE's familiar city navigation. This is disappointing as it detracts from the depth of the city, so that exploring the streets of Shibuya is made a little less varied. A variety that is certainly welcome when players are frequenting areas repeatedly and are forced to withstand loading times between that are not onerous individually but can be wearing cumulatively. On the same note, the city's ambient soundtrack can be a touch uninspiring too, and though the soundtrack itself does a better job in its character motifs, when navigating the city during side stories, this is undoubtedly one of Sharp FE's weaker points. Finally, of interest, Atlus chooses to portray most of its NPCs as full-colour character models. This can feel at times a little anonymous despite all the busyness, something that may indeed be intended, but overall contributes to a lack of urban intrigue, even if the dynamic change in the billboards in reaction to your idol's exploits is a subtle reflection of your journey. At times, it's difficult to look at Tokyo Mirage Sessions and not demand more from it. A feeling that's born from the desire that the rest of the game match the prowess of its core joys. Still, Tokyo Mirage Sessions just about avoids being too insubstantial to dull the shine of its highlights. Though it may never have the narrative resonance that so many crave from Atlus, nor be the smoothest of rides along the way, it puts entertainment at its forefront and delivers that with flying colours.